Record. Okay, so today we will talk about recursive trigger. So in interview, they will ask the first question, what is a recursive trigger? And in interview, they will ask you, what is the recursive trigger? Have you encountered any situation in your project? Encountered any situation in your last project? And were you able to resolve that? And next one, they will ask, what is the purpose of handling the request? What is the purpose of handling the request? So these are the major questions can come out from the recursive trigger. So let's go ahead and understand the recursive trigger first. So coming to the notes, recursive trigger. There are two types of recursive triggers in Salesforce. There are two types of recursive trigger in Salesforce. One is, the first one is trigger gets only two things from the database. Like as I mentioned before, whenever the trigger executes, it does only two things from the database perspective, either before or after. Before update, after update, or before insert, after insert, or before delete, after delete, or after and delete. Only two things which are before and after combining the DML. It is not caring from like where the data is coming from. It doesn't care anything. Like whether it is coming the data from data loader, whether it is coming from page, or whether it is coming from component, or it doesn't even care from where the data is coming. It will just see whenever the data comes in, it will just see and it will go ahead and update the information. That's what it does. Now there are two types of recursive triggers are there. So the first one is cyclic recursion, and the second one is self-recursion. Cyclic and self-recursion. Let's see with the, let me open Paint. Okay. So whenever trigger only talks to the database, right? Whether it is a before insert or after insert, whatever it does, it always talks to the database based on the event that is happening. Now inside this database, okay, so for example, I have a here trigger. Let's say the name of the trigger is trigger 1. In the trigger 1, I have a concept called, I have an event, which is, let's say, after insert and after update. I have two events, after insert and after update. Perfect. So whenever the trigger 1, this is the trigger 1. Whenever the trigger 1 is triggered, like a user is updating some data in the record, as soon as is save, trigger 1 is going to trigger. And whenever it is triggered, it is directly, every trigger is that is linked to the database. Whether it could be after insert or after update, anything trigger is directly linked to the database. So trigger 1 goes to the database after the data is updated. The first one it will execute at the after insert, right? Whenever the trigger 1 hits, after insert is going to the first one, it will be called because user is creating the new record. Let me add here one more thing. Let's say this is the user updating the account or inserting the record. Could be any object, right? So now whenever user insert the record, the immediately trigger 1 will fire. And in the trigger 1, the first event that is going to happen is after insert. So after insert, whatever the data is there, so trigger 1 goes to the database and it updates the data here. It will update the data. And once it is updated, that will fire one more trigger immediately. Right? It will trigger one more event, it will fire. After update will be fired. Let's assume that there is another trigger here, which is a trigger 10. Trigger 10, or that is a different trigger on the same object. And here we have only one event, which is a after update. So the logic behind the trigger is user is inserting or creating a record in Salesforce. As soon as it created, trigger 1 is going to call here. In the trigger 1, after insert will be happening. When this insert will happen, what it will do first, it will go to the database and it will update the data. Okay, based on the update, again it will trigger the after update. Now, upon doing that after update, as there is another data is there, which is going to call the trigger 10. After updating the data here, that is going to call the trigger 10. And trigger 10 will after update will be executed. After the update, again what will happen? It will go and once that is updated, it will call another trigger. So basically, now trigger 1, you are firing it. As soon as you are firing, after insert has one more trigger called after update. How this will happen? I'm writing a after insert, sending an email. Now we have written one more trigger after update, where we are updating some data. And on update of that trigger, we are calling the trigger 2. It will call the trigger 2. There is some data which is linked here. After we have some condition here, based on the one condition, it has to fire the trigger 10. Right? It will call the trigger 10 and trigger 10 once again calling the same trigger. Right? This is called as a cyclic recursion. So it will keep on doing. Again, it will go and update this. Again, it will call the trigger 1. Again, after update is going to happen. After update, it is going to check the database. After updating the database, again, it will call the trigger 10. So this will never end the cycle. So trigger 1 fires to trigger 2. Again, trigger 2 fires to trigger 1. Whenever the trigger 1 calls, it is making the changes in the database. That changes in the database is calling the trigger 10. That will immediately calling the trigger 1, and trigger 1 is making the changes to the database. That changes the database, again calling the trigger 10, and again it will call the trigger 1. So this is a running cycle. It never ends the process. It is getting into the loop. We call them as a recursive trigger or cyclic trigger, which is called as a cyclic trigger. Or cyclic recursion. Realistically, The cyclic recursion should not happen in the real time. This should not happen in the real time. Why? Because Salesforce goes by one best practices called one object, one trigger. We never write two triggers on the one object. That is followed by the Salesforce. That's the reason we say do not write the multiple triggers on one object. Because if you have a 10, 20 triggers on the same object, it is very difficult to find. If it goes into the cyclic recursion, it is difficult to find where exactly the issue is happening. Because of that, it's keep on looping. And you will not be able to know that it is one of the reasons we keep saying one object per one trigger. Because it is very difficult when you have 100 logic inside the trigger one, and if you have 3 more triggers here, and there is because of something which is keep on going into the loop, and if you have to, as a developer, if you have to debug this issue, it takes a lot of time where we don't know whether it is happening trigger 1, trigger 2, trigger 3, trigger 4, trigger 5 till 10. We have to keep on doing that. So that is a waste of time. So that's the reason it is best to handle the one trigger per object. We can use whatever the events we have. We can use before insert, before update, after insert, after update, before delete, after delete. Using all these 7 events, we can put all the 7, we can call all the logic in these 7 triggers. We have to write a if condition, if trigger dot is update and trigger dot is new, then only call that particular class and the method. Or else if the trigger dot is delete and trigger dot is before, then only call the delete method and execute that logic. Based on these conditions, we can handle multiple methods in the same trigger. So no need to write multiple triggers. Rather than you can write a multiple classes and call that classes in one trigger. So that will be the best way. Now this is a cyclic recursion, and there is another one which we have. Another one which we have is another one. So another one, let's understand that is a self-recursive, right? This can happen in real time. Whatever I'm going to tell, that might happen in the real time. This is a self-recursion. This self-recursion can happen in real time. Can we control the cyclic resolution recursion? This way, can we control? If you have that question, how do you, like in case if I am pushed into the some project, they have all this thing. Can I control the cyclic recursion?
Yes, we can.
How can we control that?
By using the custom setting, or otherwise by using the static Boolean value.
Right. But how many triggers will you do it? For example, there are 10 triggers are there. If you have to put a logic introducing the Boolean flag or custom settings, how many triggers you will do that?
Maybe for every trigger, I think we have to take one Boolean value. As of now, I know that one.
Yeah, but that is a bit difficult. But first of all, if you have this cyclic recursion in any project, first of all, you have to reduce the trigger. Take out from 10 triggers to the implement only one trigger. Then start putting the Boolean flag that can help. In future also that can help. So modification on this cyclic resolution is bring everything into the one trigger. Then
Okay.
introduce the static boolean or custom settings, whatever we have other logic we can implement in one trigger, and based on the events when it has to fire and based on the estimate context variables, we can use that and we can handle all of those. Yes, it is possible, but again, a lot of time it is going to take to do that. But there is no direct solution for this. So we do not know what to do here because somebody has implemented 10 years back or 5 years back, somebody has implemented a lot of triggers and kept it and they left the company. They only know that why they have written the multiple triggers. Right? If the new member joined into that team, it's if we give this kind of a project to the new developer, it is going to be the nightmare for that new developer. He has to first of all understand the functionality and then go through the all 10 triggers. It's a very risky there. But definitely we can customize it, but this is going to take a time for that. And coming to self-recursive, for self-recursive also we can handle this, okay, but it has to be very thin line we have to put by adding the static boolean variable here also. But let's understand what is the static self-recursion. Self-recursion is nothing but you have a database. So for example, you have one database, right? And also you have a trigger one. Let's assume that you have a trigger one here. Okay. So let's assume that here also saying after insert, after update is there. So whenever the trigger one fires, whenever the trigger one firing, what it will do? It will update the data into the database. Once it is updated the data into database, then again there is a after update. So same trigger will be called from the database again. So it will be trigger one pushing the data to the database. Again, database is updated based on the database update. Again, the same trigger is called because we have some logic which is going to update the call the same trigger on the after update or when after insert. So what will happen? This is in the same trigger we keep on doing, we keep on running. It went into the loop in the same trigger. So this is a self-recursion. They have one trigger, one object. That is perfectly fine. As per the Salesforce, we are following the one trigger per one object. But one trigger also, the logic if we have written in such a way that once the data is updated here, again calling the same trigger, if we have this kind of a logic, what will happen? It will keep on going to the loop and it will throw an error to the user. Now, for example, let me give you a business scenario for this. Let's say that as soon as let's take the opportunity. Okay, as soon as the user creates a new record, user creates a new record in the opportunity. Then we want system to create another opportunity called system opportunity. This is the name. Okay. So what is the business case? User is creating some record in the opportunity. The first opportunity was created. As soon as it is passed to the database, immediately the trigger creates one more opportunity. which is a second opportunity, and the name with that system opportunity or system generated or system created. And as soon as the system generated opportunity is created, again trigger will fire and it will create another opportunity. Because you know that trigger does not see the source, who is creating, whether system is creating, user is creating, it doesn't matter for the trigger. Whether it is created by system or whether it is created by data loader, it does not see the source. So now, as soon as one opportunity is created by the user, the trigger created one opportunity. Additional opportunity, that additional fired same trigger to create one more opportunity for that bit, for that additional opportunity, right? So let's say user is creating the one record. Okay, let's say user is creating the 100 ATM opportunity they are creating. Okay, what it will do, trigger it will look for the insert. Okay, as soon as it is inserted, create another opportunity which is called as a system generated. And as soon as this record is created, again trigger will fire and it will create one more opportunity which is a system generated. Again trigger will fire and again it will create one more record, system generated. Like there is a no stop for this. It keeps on going on. It will keep on creating the system generated. Right? There is no end for this trigger. Somebody has to go there and stop the trigger. Right? So this will not stop. So if this way is called as a self-recursive trigger. This goes into the loop. Let's see with the example. Let's go to the developer console. Let's create a new trigger. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a self-recursive trigger first. File new apex trigger. tr_1203. Example 1. This is what we are doing, recursive trigger. So let's say recursive trigger. On which object? Opportunity object. Perfect. Now, so I'll take the same business scenario, whatever we have implemented, right? So let me go ahead and let's create a apex class. CL tr_1107. Let's say that recursive trigger helper. Okay, so let's put the date as 1107. Now inside this, let's go ahead and create a method, which is a static method, public static void. We are creating the system generated opportunity. So create system generated opportunity. Okay, I'm not expecting anything here from the trigger because I do not need any value as soon as the user creates the record. What is my criteria here? As soon as the user creates a record, I just wanted to create another record, which is a system generated. I do not want any information from the previous record. So that's the reason I do not need any parameters here. So what I'll do, simply I'll go ahead and create an opportunity. Let's create an instance here. Opportunity equal to new opportunity. Right, so let's give some mandatory information. Name equal to let's say that system created opportunity and o dot stage name equal to, let's say that prospecting, and what was we need, close state. Close date equal to system dot perfect. Now here let me create a list of opportunity OPP list equal to new list of opportunity. Perfect. Let's add everything into this collection. Add. Oh. Now let's go ahead and insert OPP list. Okay, before that, let's go ahead and check whether it has some data or not. Greater than 0. Then put everything into the if condition. Perfect. Let's save this and call this method from the. What is the problem? Okay, I cannot use the non-static, so I have to use the public static list of opportunity OPP list equal to new list of opportunity. Okay, now of list dot size greater than 0. What is the problem here? Okay, it has to be after closing this. Okay, now let's save and then call this class from the before insert we are calling, right? Before insert. It is a static method, so I need not to initialize the class again. So I can use create a sync opportunity. Okay, now let's save this. Where are we writing? We are writing on the opportunity. Now let's go ahead and create one opportunity. Opportunity. Opportunities. Okay. Now let's click on a new name. Let's give 100 ATM. Any other date, close date. Okay, stage, prospecting. And that's all I need here. I do not need any other information. Let's click on save. Now, as soon as I click on save, it is going to throw me an error saying that execution before insert paused by the DML exception. And here you see, so first trigger fired before insert executed, again fired, again it is executed, trying to create a new one. Again it created, again it created, again it created. Multiple times it called the before insert. Right, so it is throwing me an error. Insert failed, maximum trigger depth exceeded. Maximum trigger depth exceeded. That is what means it went into the loop. It's keep on creating the record. It's keep on creating the record, never ending that. whatever the maximum trigger execution is there, it went in depth. So it will give maximum trigger depth exceeded. Now, how can I control the self-recursion? We have to introduce a flag. We have to introduce a flag. Different ways we can do it. Either you can do it in the one flag, introducing a flag into the class, or you can use the custom settings, or you can use the custom label, or you can use the custom metadata, anything you can use using the configuration. Or you can create a flag field in the record. So based on the requirement, whichever is possible, do it that way. But mostly in the real time, what we do is we introduce the flag in the class. So we will introduce a recursive flag. So public static, I have to take a static boolean. Let's say that recursive flag. So initially recursive flag will be true. So as soon as it is inserted, so what I can do is, as soon as it is inserted, I can set the flag to be false. That means as soon as it's called, here I have to put the condition, if the recursive flag equal to true, then only go inside. Then only go inside. And this entire logic goes into the if condition. Now, as soon as it went inside the if condition, change the flag to false. Switch off the flag, saying that, okay, it is executed perfectly fine. Now, where to add, when to switch off this flag, it's decided by the developer. Like if you say that, like once it is done with adding into the opportunity list, then only set that, then do it bottom. Like if you have any other logic, like creating the contact or creating the related account, creating the related users, once the user is created successfully, then only switch off the flag. You can do that. All right. So wherever you want, you can do that. But right now I'm adding, as soon as come inside this, set this to the false. Now that's all I needed here. Why we are taking static? Static is the final value. Okay. So static means instance will be created with the recursive recursive flag equal to true. If I do not take the static, that means instances will be created multiple times. One more time, if it calls this class, again this will set it to the true. And one more thing, inside this static, I cannot call the non-static Boolean values here. So it has to be static. So if you do not have a static here, first time you are calling this, okay? So that time it will be true and this method gets executed. And if you have one more method which you need to call second time, let's say that there is another method inside this class. So second time, what will happen? Whenever it calls the second time, it will create another instance. Another instance in the memory with the recursive flag equal to true. So whichever way you want, you have to use. But if you have a static method, use the static Boolean. But the right way is to, whenever you are declaring the recursive flag, use the static. Now, Control Z, save. Okay. So now what will happen? It will come here. Okay. First user will be creating the 100 ATM. Whenever the 100 ATM is created, my flag is true. Right? The first time the flag is true. And then it is going to create, as soon as it is created, then it will create another system generated. That time I'm changing the flag equal to false. Right? I'm changing the flag equal to false. and changing the flag equal to false. Now it will come here. Again, trigger will fire. When the trigger is fired, it will check what is my flag, whether it is true or false. Our logic is if it is true, then only go ahead and create a record. But our flag is now false because whenever the first time it is created, we are changing the flag to false. So it will not create. So whatever the bottom ones are there, it will not create these records will not be created. Only one record gets created automatically by the system. Now let's go ahead and create it, cancel. Before that, let me show you the opportunity list. All the opportunities, we do not have any system generated here. Okay. So we do not have anything here. Now let's go ahead and create 100 ATM. Perfect. And close date. Let's give it as the next month 24. Stage prospecting. Let's save this. As soon as it's saved, I did not save my trigger. Let's put this inside the, once it is inserted. And let's save. Okay. Refresh window. I'm in same order, right? Dev 7. Okay. Red ATM, close state, stage prospecting, save. See, it's saved. It's saved, and along with this, it created another record. So system created all, right? So today records, how many records created? This is a close date. Created date, I do not have here. Let's modify. Select the field to display. Created date, let's push it here. Created date, let's bring it up. Save. Now refresh. Created date, sort it. Right. So how many records it created? It created today 2 records. One is the one user created it, and the second one is system created. So this is working fine. So by introducing the recursive flag, we are able to do that. By introducing the recursive flag, we are able to do that. Any questions so far before I move on to the next one? So next one is trigger best practices. Trigger best practices.
I have one doubt. Hello.
Yeah.
How can we use the custom label in this trigger to avoid the recursion?
Custom label, like that does not work as if you have a long logic, very big logic. If you have, you cannot do. So when I say custom label is nothing but you have to define the value there. Okay. And here is the setup. So in custom label, if you have the value equal to, let's say that prospecting or 1 is there, okay, label value equal to there. And can we change the custom label by using the trigger or by using the Apex class? Can you update the custom label value?
I think we can't change.
Right. We can't change, but how can I modify my custom label value? Right, custom label cannot be possible. So either flag or custom setting or metadata, or introducing a new field on the record level. Okay, these are the 4 ways. Is there any other way we can handle the recursive?
No, I think.
Okay, so these are the 4 ways. Okay. Any other questions?
I have one question, madam.
Yeah.
Is it like recursive triggers are like automated generated or what, madam? I didn't get this.
It's not auto-generated. Have you got this, what is happening, the logic behind this? Have you got this flow? So for example, there is a one trigger, okay? In that trigger, you have a after insert. After insert is sending an email and you are updating the, let's take the same logic, okay? You are creating a one record, which is called as a 100 ATM. As soon as you create a record, you wanted to create another record by the system. When I say by the system, you are writing the code in the trigger. Okay. So first, when the record is created, what trigger will fire and it will insert the data here for the 100 ATM. As soon as it is inserted, your logic is to create another system generated. Okay, so what will happen? The database will again, it is going to fire the trigger 1 because you have a logic to create another record. Now again it will come, it will create a system generated. Another record gets created. And whenever the another record gets created, you have the same logic to create one more record. So it will keep on creating the records in the, it will keep on creating the records in the trigger. So that means the logic will keep on in the loop.
So that we wrote in the logic which we wrote in the class.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
So in order to stop, like in order to create whatever this are there, in order to stop creating multiple records. So what we have done is, in order to stop doing this, we have introduced a flag. So as soon as the trigger is created, the record, stop doing any other thing.
Okay.
Kind of a red signal. Now user is created one and you are created another one. That's it. Stop. Do not go move further. Do not go further.
Okay. Okay, ma'am.
Okay, coming to trigger best practices. So as I mentioned, one trigger per one object. That means a single apex trigger is all that we have to write, and whatever the logic we wanted to do it in one single apex trigger. That should be enough for maintaining it. And the second one is logicless trigger. When I say logicless trigger, if you write a method in your trigger, you cannot expose those trigger for another classes, or for example, let's say that you have written some generic, creating your opportunity. Okay, there is another business scenario again. They wanted also creating an opportunity. If you wanted to expose that method, you cannot do that. And if you wanted to keep it in more generic, then create a separate class and create a separate method and call those methods based on the event and context variables. So based on that, only call that particular method. And one more thing, whenever you are fetching the object in your SOQL, do not include any other fields, like what are the fields that we needed to do the logic, only include only that particular logic. That means if you need only select ID, comma, name, comma, stage name, and closing date from the opportunity, only if you need only those fields, query only those fields. Do not query other fields like a last name or a description, subject. Do not query all of those which are not required anything. And the next one is context specific handler. Context specific handler method. Rather than creating a multiple triggers, create only one trigger, and based on the requirement and based on the event, call that specific method. And using the context variable, call that specific method. That should be fine. And next one is bulkify. Bulkify the code. So whatever you are writing the code, make sure that should work. The logic should work for more than one record. So never use like a account A equal to new account and do not insert only one record. Take the list or the collection, whatever you are doing it, list of the account. So always consider that whenever we are writing, always consider this logic has to work for the multiple records. And the second one and the next one is avoid SOQL queries. Avoid SOQL queries inside for loop. Same thing, another one, avoid DML statement inside for loops. And the next best practices is whenever you are handling with a large set of data, then use @future. Put that method in the @future if you are handling with a large data set. If you are playing with large set of data, then use the @future annotation for that particular method so that it will run in asynchronously and update the data. And the next one is last one, avoid hard coding the data. Hard coding the especially IDs. Hard coding the IDs we have to avoid it because whenever we deploy or when we switch to the another org, the IDs will be keep on changing, and it is not good practice to use the exact 18-digit or 15-digit ID inside the trigger. So these are some of the trigger best practices. Now coming to the trigger limitations. Trigger limitations. So trigger limitations are, there are two different ways we have a trigger limitation. The first one is where the trigger does not fire. Where the trigger does not fire. And the second one is trigger fires, but nothing happened. Nothing happened. For example, so there are some fields that cannot be updated by trigger. there are few fields that cannot be updated by trigger. Let's say that ID, okay, created date, last modified. These are the couple of things, right? So those we cannot update it from the trigger. And there are some things which are trigger does not fire. So those are like a mass updating address. Mass updating address is nothing but like when you do the mass insertion to the data loader or to the workbench, if you do the mass insertion, that will work, trigger will fire. But I'm talking about the mass updating address. If you go to the setup, data management, you have a data management. Okay, inside this data management, we have something called mass update address, mass transfer records, mass transfer approval request, mass delete records. Whatever we have a mass here inside the data management, the trigger will not fire for them. And apart from this, if you are renaming or replacing the pick list values or managing the price books or changing the user default division with the transfer division option, for this, the trigger will not fire. And the next one is trigger and the order of execution. So trigger and order of execution is basically whenever the record is inserted, okay. So whenever user insert the record, okay, as soon as the user insert the record, and inside trigger what we have, one is before and another one is after. This is a before trigger and this is after trigger. This is after trigger. Now, once a user create the record, so what will happen? First, the system will, Salesforce will come into the picture. So Salesforce, what it will do, it will first validate the system validation. Those are the system validations. So first, what it will do, Salesforce cross verify what are my system validations. Does it have any system validations or not? Does it have any system validations or not? If there is nothing is fired, so everything is perfectly fine, then directly we call the trigger. Okay, in the trigger, we are doing the before trigger. So before the one is which gets executed first. Before it is executing the first. And none of them will execute after the before trigger. Like once it is done with the before trigger, just a second. Okay, so first it will execute the logic within the before trigger. And once it is done, the next one which is going to verify is user defined validation. On the object level, we have a validations. We have a validation rule. So it will fire the validation rule. Once the before trigger is done, it is going to verify the user defined validation rule. So once the validation rule is done, then it will call the after trigger. Now after trigger, the actual all of them gets created. When I say all of them, after trigger, we have, let's say that once the record is created, we want to assign some rules. We wanted to assign some rules like a owner. I wanted to change or assign the queue to the owner to the queue. So whatever we have, the assignment rule, those gets fired. And once it is assigned, a queue or owner is assigned, then all the flows, whatever the flows we have in the system, could be a workflow, process builder, lightning flows, whatever the flows we have, all the flows gets executed. All the flows gets executed. So this flow, what it does basically, whether it could be a flows, workflows, or process builder, could be anything. But what is the logic that is written here? Again, updating the record. We either update the record or we send an email. That's what we do. There is some business logic might be written in the flows. So once this is done, okay, so once this is done, next thing will be, if we have any rules, that those are, if I wanted to escalate it, if we have any rules on the escalation, which is called as a escalation rules, that will fire. But in case if you do not have any escalation rule, then the next thing which is going to cross verify is roll-up summary. Do you have any roll-up summary? I mean, is there any master detail relationship on that object? In case if you do not have a roll-up summary, then what will happen? It is going to check, is there any duplicate? Is there any duplicate rule? Just a second. Yeah. So system before trigger validation rule, after trigger assignment rule, flow escalation, roll-up summary. Once the roll-up summary is done, then the next one is comes into the sharing rules. Because till this point, all the data is updated. All the data is updated into the record. Now, updated in a sense, it is still in the air. It is not yet committed to the DML. So in case if you do not have any roll-up summary, the next one it is going to check, do you have any sharing rule? Do you have any sharing rule on this object? Do you have any sharing rules on this object? In case if you do not have none of them, then what it will do, it will directly go to the database. It will directly go to the database and commit all the DML operations to the database. It will commit all the DML operations. So for whatever the DMLs are there, it will commit everything into the database. Then after this, what will happen? If there is any post commit logic is there, if there is any post commit logic is there, then it's get executed. Right? So after trigger assignment rule, it is going to verify whether do we have like any assignment, owner assignment, then it will execute the flows. Then once we have a business logic and whatever it executes, then it will cross verify the escalation rules. If you do not have any escalation rules, because escalation rules will not be have for the most of the object, so it will go to the roll-up summary. In case if you do not have any master detail relationship with this object, then it will go to the sharing rule. If none of them is not there, then it will go and commit the data to the database, and whatever the post commit logic is there, it will execute. Only you have to remember is after trigger, what it will execute, assignment rule and then flows. That's it. And before and after, in between that, we have a user depend validation rule. Anything, sharing rule, escalation rules, assignment rules, or owner update, anything, if you have anything, that everything gets executed after the trigger job is done. Once the trigger job is done, then all the logic and play the role.
So when the record ID will be generated for any record?
Sorry?
When the ID will be generated for record after committing into database only, or?
Yes, after committing to the database, then only the ID gets generated.
Okay, but in the after trigger, okay, in the after trigger, actually we can access new trigger.new map.
Yes, we can access, but in between that, so you are saying that after trigger, it will directly go to the database and it will commit. So once it is committed, then only I'll be having the ID here.
Yes,
but before it goes to the DML database, it has to go through these all steps. If you do not have these anymore in your object, if you do not have this assignment rules for sharing, and it is a very quick to commit the database. In case if you have anything in between them, you can debug and see that in your debug logs. If you go to the bottom in the debug logs, it will show what are the executions it happened. It will show from the bottom to top, before update, after update, then it will show the flows. And flows, there is any updation or anything is there, then it will show that. Then once it is done, then finally it is committed. Your debug log also gives this information.
Okay.
Okay, so and coming to the trial head. So there are 3 trial heads which we have to complete. So the first one is, this is record triggered flow. That is a triggered flow. Okay. Use behavior trigger in the marketing cloud. So in the marketing cloud also we use the trigger, but see if you can able to understand. This is a journey builder. We have something called a journey builder. Okay, so there also we use the behavioral trigger. And next, which is a trial mix, this is. So this has a apex trigger, complete developer, beginner, developer, advanced. Because so far, whatever we have done, everything is covered in this. So try to complete this trial mix. That should be fine. And if anybody is interested in the marketing cloud, how the behavioral trigger works, you can go through this trigger, this trial head. Okay. Any other questions?
I have one doubt. In the
Yeah.
trigger best practices, actually, we are saying we don't have to write the logic in trigger, write the logic in handler class. But in the VS Code, I have installed apxt DMD. Because of that one, it is showing, even if I use the if block also, for every context variable, for before insert, I am calling one method. For before update, I am calling another method. So for that one also, if I write if blocks, it is showing you don't have to write the logic in trigger.
So you are just doing the context variable. That's it, right? You are not writing any other thing.
No, I'm not writing. I'm not writing any other logic.
Okay. So ideal scenario is, even for the context, there are three things are there: trigger, trigger handler, trigger helper. Okay.
Okay.
So what are the context variables are there where to execute? Handler will be handling it. So handler part is which method should I need to call. So that is going to decided by handler. So for whatever I have implemented, I have written all the context variables in the handler, and that handler will be called from the trigger.
Okay.
Trigger part is on the which event it should be executed, before insert or before update, or after update or after insert. Only that role is when should I run, before update or after update, or before insert or after insert, or before delete, after delete, after undelete. My role is only that everything I can define on the trigger level. And once that is done, the next handler part is, okay, trigger says that, okay, go and call the handler because I'm not responsible to call the anything. So handler will be the one which is going to handle when to call which method.
Okay.
And that handler will be dealing with all the business logic, and that handler will call the class again. And that class, whatever the methods we have written, we have to write everything in the generic way. Because in case in future, if we need same logic or same structure, if we need it, we can use it in different places also.
Okay. What will do the trigger helper?
Helper is the class. Helper is, it's a normal class where you are writing the logic, business logic you are writing.
Okay.
So helper is a normal class, handler is also normal class.
Okay.
But using the, why do we say handler helper is to understand for us trigger handler, trigger helper. Okay, so helper will be class. This is a class, and handler is also class. Okay, these two are class, and this is a trigger. This is a trigger. Why do we have two classes? Because if you write everything, all the logic here, right now, whenever you are implementing today, you will be aware what is the logic you are writing. Let's assume that there is a 200 lines of logic is there. Everything you have written the handler. Okay. Now tomorrow somebody will come and modify this. What they will do, it will be like a mix, and you do not know which one is calling when. You do not know that. If you want to maintain the logic or the code better way, in the handler we can define, okay, if my trigger is insert and is before, then call specific class. So that way I can divide my logic in the handler.
So trigger.is insert and trigger.is before variables, that context variables we can use in the trigger handler, right?
Yeah.
How can using the variables in the trigger handler by creating instance of this class in the trigger?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I understood.
Okay. So any other questions? Whom I was speaking till now? Manjunath?
Murali Krishna.
Murali Krishna. Okay.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. This is Manjunath.
Yeah.
Yeah, today I just joined. Is it free training or is it paid training?
For that details, you can contact one number. Okay. I'll bring you the number.
Okay, okay. Yeah, why? Because I asked you in the YouTube regarding LWC. Myself, Manjunath.
Oh, okay. Okay. LWC, we already did one session. But
Okay,
if you want, contact this number.
okay, madam.
LWC Aura sessions are already completed and we are planning to start a new batch.
LWC and Aura, ma'am.
Yeah. And
Okay.
also we are planning to start a lightning course. So once this is completed, based on that, I'm planning to start the lightning course.
Lightning. May I know?
Flows.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah. We are planning to start the flows.
Okay.
So his name is Madhu. You can contact him. There are multiple sessions are going on in a day. So you can contact and check with him. Any other questions?
Yeah, daily there are multiple batches.
Yeah, yeah. Daily there are 3 batches are running.
LWC complete. May exactly know what will be the fee structure. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, regarding the finance fees, I'm not aware of that. You can directly contact me.
Okay, madam. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if there are no questions, we will wind up today. We'll meet tomorrow, probably this time, or I will see if I can do it at 12 o'clock.
On which topic, madam, tomorrow?
So we are planning to start the testing. So all of the parts are done. We are going to focus on the testing.
Okay.